Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we will be reviewing the Finca el Árbol natural carbonic maceration processed Nicaragua from Kafferaven. There's the container right there. And Kafferaven based out of Gothenburg, Sweden. And this is part 10 of our 24-part KaffeBox Advent Calendar series, our second coffee from Kafferaven and the first natural carbonic maceration processed coffee in the Advent calendar. I think a lot of people know at this point that the more heavily processed coffees tend to be some of my least favorite. However, I do know that there are a lot of people that do enjoy these coffees as well, so I do appreciate its inclusion in the Advent calendar. Again, the way that this works, the notes and tasting wheel are made with the V60. This cup right here is made with the Chemex. And we opted for our standard recipe, which is a 16:1 water to coffee ratio brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, 205 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, in terms of roast profile, as I always say, when it comes to these more experimental processed coffees, it's a little bit more difficult to tell because they do come out a little bit more developed than otherwise because they do have some heaviness to them. So just kind of keep that in mind. Best way to always describe the roast profile when it comes to these sorts of coffees. With all of that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. First impression, and the cup definitely did emit heaviness right from the start, and that heaviness did increase with a cool down to the cup as there was a heavy fermenty aspect right from the start of the cup that skews very much in the boozy fermenty berry aspects. And I think my biggest grievance with these coffees have been that I have a very difficult time discerning too many different flavor profiles for them. A lot of people know that I tend to prefer the more delicate cups of coffee, especially the more subtle components and complexity to them, whereas these, they come out really strong right at the onset, and as a result, they oftentimes dominate any sort of lingering and hidden aspects to the coffee, as they remain so strong on the palate that it can be difficult to pick the other additional components out. Chocolate feels very heavy. That's been consistent throughout drinking these sorts of coffees, as it's extremely robust and long-lasting. The additional aspects to this cup included a brightness, and it was citric with a fair bit of graininess to it as well. They did list a Fruit Loop flavor note listed on here, and it's kind of interesting because, yeah, it does have the grainy quality to it, although I didn't necessarily pull out maybe more of the sugary aspects to it. This cup felt a little lacking in terms of those sugary components to the cup just in general. Definitely skewed a lot more on the robust chocolate side of things, as well as the heaviness, fermentiness, and that typically lends itself to this kind of, I hate to say it, olive-like quality, this kind of strong berry-like quality, as it does leave a very lasting finish that continues to skew heavily in that fermented direction. This right here, again, it's not too different in the Chemex as opposed to the V60, as they both seem to have these really long-lasting dominant flavor profiles to them that I was unable to dilute or tone down. I feel like if I had this entire bag of coffee to work with, there are some adjustments I make. Usually it's increasing the ratio and lowering the temperature to just kind of dilute the coffee in general. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And 2 level 5s, so let's go through those real quick. The finish level 5, and one thing I have to say about the finish, I don't think I've ever said this before when it comes to one of these coffees, is I feel like it's really kind of changed the spectrum for how the finish is really defined, because these coffees are so heavy that sometimes they come out in such a strong and pronounced manner that coffees maybe in the past a couple of years ago that might have scored a 5, now score a 4 just because of how long-lasting these coffees are. This one right here definitely has a long-lasting fermenty aspect to the cup, so that one definitely justifies that level 5, as I will definitely be tasting this coffee for a while after it's been consumed. Berry fruit level 5, interestingly, this isn't as maybe boozy berry forward as a lot of the other cups of coffee. It actually has a lot more of a heavy chocolate component to it, which I will probably discuss when we do get to that chocolate, but in terms of the fruit component, I would say that this is the one because it has a lot of those kind of red fruit profiles to it that aren't necessarily my favorite. So that definitely scores pretty high in that, although I'm kind of thinking on it now and saying maybe it's a little high. Bunch of level 4s as well. We'll start with the sweetness. Sweetness level 4, although it's there, it's not necessarily the type of sweetness I enjoy. It's a very kind of heavy dark chocolate sweetness. It's a very heavy berry sweetness. It's a very fermenty sweetness to the cup. So that's not necessarily going to be my favorite. And that's kind of alongside a bright aspect to this coffee. This acidity is actually quite high in it as well. So that's not necessarily something I enjoy. So those kind of all working together, especially given that it's quite long lasting in that sense, not necessarily my favorite. citrus fruit, secondary components to it in terms of any sort of fruit profile, and it's just kind of the undefined brightness to it. I didn't have anything that I could specifically or closely identify it with, but maybe a very strong sort of citric graininess to the cup. And then the chocolate also at a level 4. I'm kind of wondering if maybe I should switch those in terms of the chocolate and the berry, kind of lower the berry down to a level 4 and the chocolate up to a level 5, because the chocolate is really heavy in the cup. It's right at the forefront. It's persistent throughout, continues to linger within the cup itself. Very dominant, really just does seem to define this coffee in general. Much more on the dark side of things, much more on the kind of smoky, bitter side of things, because it is just that heavy. A couple of level 3s as well. The body at a level 3. Actually, I was kind of thinking on this one because it doesn't have as much body as I think I was expecting going into this coffee. I was deciding between a 2 or a 3, but I think it just skewed a little bit more on the 3 side of things. So body is kind of in the middle of that. Maybe not as much body as you might anticipate going into this coffee. Bitterness, level 3, yes, that is from the dark chocolate aspect to the cup. Also the citric aspect as well. They give it a fair bit of bitterness, as well as the savoriness, because there is a slightly kind of herbal quality to it. I mentioned that these coffees a lot of the time kind of taste olive-like to me, so that's where the savoriness comes in. And then the smokiness, yeah, it feels like a very smoky chocolate as well. So all of those things score a level 3, and those are additional characteristics to the cup, as well as the saltiness, because this cup does seem to have a fair bit of saltiness. And then the last thing we must discuss is the cleanliness, which is at a level 1. These coffees have no clarity for me. As you can tell, there are a lot of notes I'm saying here undefined. There's one thing that really seems to dominate the cup, and it dominates in a more fermenty sense. So that's why there isn't much clarity to it. It definitely reaches that level 1 mark, and that's obviously going to be a big sticking point to me, given that clarity is maybe my most prioritized aspect in a coffee. So I think that this tasting wheel actually goes well for both. I think it's pretty similar with the Chemex. There wasn't too much difference between the brew methods for this one. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. It's not my favorite. These coffees are probably my least favorite coffees out there. The more heavily processed a coffee is, the less I seem to like it. So that's just kind of the case with this one. And I alluded to the fact at the start of this video that I know a lot of people that really enjoy these coffees. A lot of people send me a lot of these coffees in terms of, hey, look at this one, tell me what you think about this one. And the answers are pretty much the same. I kind of expect to go into it not necessarily being the biggest fan, and this has been my case. There are a lot of reviews on this channel that are like this coffee because they seem to kind of come off the same to me. And I don't know if it's because I just have difficulty tasting differences from these coffees as opposed to stuff that may be a little bit more clean, but that seems to be the case. And this one's just, unfortunately, another one of those coffees that isn't necessarily my type of coffee. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, though, is people that have been a big fan of the more heavily fermented coffees, people that are still enjoying the more robust characteristics to them, most distinctly that kind of heavy chocolate aspect to it with a very long-lasting flavor to it, because these are very heavy in flavor. Even if they aren't necessarily the most direct or defined flavor, they still have so much of it, and it does last for quite a while. I think for the most part, I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Finca el Árbol, natural carbonic maceration processed Nicaragua from Kafferaven. Thank you for watching.